This is to illustrate a tale, maybe not so much a moral tale per se, and not just one moral point or moral course, but many points. Many things about identity, about power, about finding oneself, about the themes are just multi-layered.
Yeah, there's a ton of themes, in this film, and I mean, I do like that pretty much every major human character plus the unicorn, all get a character arc. Like even Prince Lear arguably gets a character arc, even though it's a smaller one, and Haggard has the sort of the fulfillment of his destiny, if you will.
Yes.
By the end of the film, it was always going to end that way for him.
Yeah, Peripatia.
Yeah.
And
so
it's a great little story with characters, and it has a pirate cat. What more could you ask of a story than a pirate cat? I saw the cat and I was like, it has a peg leg. Is it going to talk like a pirate? But it doesn't talk when you first meet it. And then in the later scene, it talks, and it talks like a pirate. And I was like, yes.
And I find it interesting that Molly does not even find it weird that the cat is talking to her. No. I guess at this point, she done seen so much magical shit. It's just, talking cat.
I mean, she's talking to a unicorn. A chatty cat is normal at this point. We're fine. Getting back to Haggard, he's playing this... he's a really interesting kind of antagonist. He's not the usual opulent, decadent king. He's not hungering for wealth and power. Nobody lives there except him and his, ostensible son and the pirate cat.
Yeah.
And the magic user who Schmendrick replaces.
Right, yep. Who's barely there. And who may or may not be the source of the Red Bull. But and that's because he doesn't want anything but, as he said, what makes him happy, which is a weird thing. But he's almost like a dragon sitting on a hoard of gold, except he's sitting on a seashore full of unicorns.
Yep.
And it's very, it's very subtle the way you first get that idea passed along, where Amalthea's looking out at the sea. He's like, why are you looking out at the sea? I also love to look out at the sea. And you don't think anything of it. It kind of, the line goes through you. It makes sense as character building or whatever, but you don't realize until later. He's speaking quite literally. His treasure's in the ocean. He doesn't want anyone else there.
Yep.
He's got the cat, and he's got the magic user, and he's got this son who's adopted, is not his real son. And I'm not sure why he's there, except he wants one other guy who knows how to swing a sword, but he pretends to be his guard of his own gate, and then only reveals off by pulling the mask off that he's in fact the king. So he's a really interesting character and a really interesting antagonist who's driven by the fact that he got to see unicorns and wants to possess them all by having the Red Bull drive them into the sea. And
I liked the bit where they first are introduced and they come into the court in Haggard's room, and Schmendrick is like, "This is a crypt. What are we doing?" And and then he's like, maybe a master wizard won't. It hasn't made me happy. Perhaps an incompetent one will. And he summons his current one, and they know each other.
And they do. And he's like, hey,
Schmendrick, good to see you. How's it going? And just I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, and I thought it was funny because at that point in their story, you're like, is he even a wizard? And I'm like, oh no, this much better wizard actually knows him. He's a wizard.
Yeah, he actually is a wizard. He's just an apprentice. He's, or like Kieran said, a hedge wizard, a hedge mage. He's just he's starting out. And that kind of gives him a little bit more legitimacy in his role, even though we just watched him turn a unicorn into a girl, so he should have all the legitimacy.
Yep.
He's also very shabbily dressed.
The magician or Schmendrick, he's shabbily dressed. The wizard has a crown, but Haggard doesn't. I found that interesting.
Yeah, that was an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah. And it makes you think that, like, oh, is this guy actually the master? But he's not, because Haggard's like, bye! Never darken my door again. I don't like you. And it really is. Like, Haggard is his own master, and he's the master of everything else. And there's something admirable in the way it's like, I don't like this. This does not spark joy.
Yeah.
Therefore, I do not want it. I dispense with this. Other people, I dispense with this. This guy who served me for me, no.
Yep.
Give me
Done
this
with it.
dork instead. This no longer pleases me.
Into the trebuchet. Yeah.
If only there'd been a trebuchet, that would have been great.
What?
Nice goofy scream as it goes on.
My wife has a fixation on trebuchets. She's going to hear this later because she likes to listen to our podcast. And I have to explain to her why she can't have a trebuchet.
Tell her fetchy lavage. And she'll look confused and just be like, fetchy lavage.
Fetchy lavage. Un cadeau. Un cadeau. Anyway. So they're there. They're at the castle. Things start getting revealed, and then we have like the romantic subplot with Lear and Amalthea, who, as she becomes more human, becomes more and more open to all of this. And it's one of those things where, you know, people don't obviously have a clue as to what's happening. Like, Molly is like, you should be nice to him. He's a nice guy. He doesn't mean you any harm. Not, you know, and that she does, and then becomes more and more human, which means she's more and more forgets she's a unicorn, which is the opposite of what Molly wants or anybody wants. So it doesn't have this like lockstep, we have to hit the plot points. It just kind of flows. And
Shit happens.
Yeah, and it's the animation style is also very flowy, because that's Rankin-Bass's trademark. Even when things are scuzzy and crinkled, they almost have a liquid quality to them.
A very Baroque style to them. A very Baroque style.
Yeah.
Yes, I did see Mum Ross Spit Springs.
Yeah, almost Art Deco, I'd say. Or is it Art Nouveau? I can never get those two straight.
Art Nouveau.
Yeah.
It's almost an Art Nouveau look to it. And the interesting thing about Lear, how he contrasts his adoptive father so much, is that Lear doesn't want to possess Althea. He wants to help Althea. Yes, he loves her, but he doesn't wish to own her. He doesn't wish to possess her. He simply wants her recognition.
It's the chivalric ideal, you know. Right. Here's a noble lady. I'm a noble knight. I will offer myself in service of the noble lady and expect nothing of her but her acknowledgement and favor, for I am a noble knight, and this is what noble knights do. It's that kind of thing. And it's played very straight. Yeah. And unironic, and Jeff Bridges' vocal performance is such that you absolutely believe it. Yep. Because he's very matter of fact about it. It's like, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do. Even when he's given an opportunity, even when, you know, they have a little smoochy kiss, you know, on the balcony, very romantic at the end of that song that was
Unnamed.
And yeah, that was the second song in
through, yes.
10 minutes, and I was just I kind of like vapor locked out for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
And but then it has its culmination, and then the movie gets weirder. Then there's the pirate cat that talks like a pirate, and it's great. And he gives them the information that they need, and they all kind of gather to like try to get through the clock. And the clock is ticking weird and sounds awful, and Schmendrick's trying to figure it out, and it just keeps getting weirder. Because then there's a skeleton.
Yep.
Who's my favorite character.
And when you were talking about just some of the great lines, the pirate cat says, "Never was there a cat born that could give a straight answer."
I love that. That was a great line. Never was there a cat born that could give a straight answer. That's fantastic. The cat's great. He has like 5-minute scenes of dialogue, and he's wonderful. It's like, it sounds goofy, a pirate cat, but the lines are on point.
He doesn't even have the eye patch. He has 2 eyes. He just wears the eye patch.
It's like, I've got a peg leg. I need the eye patch. Is it an affectation? Yes. And none of this is explained.
No,
We don't
none of
know
this.
why the cat talks or why he has an eye patch or why he has a peg leg. None of this is explained. It's just there. Just
I
go
believe
with
the
it.
cat's name is, in my head canon, the cat's name is Jack. I'm just going to put that out there.
I'm going to ruin that conception
What
for
I-
you by looking
it?
it
I
up what it
think-
actually is.
The cat and the butterfly are the only ostensibly normal animals that we hear talk.
Mm-hmm.
In this film. Every other creature that speaks is either a human or a actual like
Supernatural
it's
entity.
either the harpy or it's the unicorn. There's like the tree that's briefly animated by magic, but like we're not going to count that.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting as well.
The cat is just named Cat.
Mhm.
But Cat is voiced by Paul Frees, who also voiced Maverick the Magician.
Oh, interesting.
So
Paul Frees has done a shit ton of voice work like for decades.
So maybe Maverick hung around and in the form of a cat. It would explain how it would explain how he knows everything. Or maybe he was Maverick's cat, and King Haggard didn't care enough to get rid of him.
Somebody's got to keep the mice down.
Exactly. Is that there's two different ways to explain what's going on here, and I just came up with these. And the movie leaves you very free to like, whatever you think, it's fine. Whatever you think is fine. We don't need lore.
And the skeleton is voiced by, I cannot pronounce his name, but he played Odo in Deep Space Nine. He was also on
Rene
Benson.
Auberjonois.
Jean Noir, yes.
Rene Auberjonois, the most French name that can possibly exist.
Ah, yes, very nice.
And he's my favorite character. He's marvelous. He lasts the entire time. He's a lunatic, and yet he lusts for wine.
He's like,
Was he a noble king? Why is he up there on top of that ledge next to the lock?
we're
Is
never
he a
given an
jester that
explanation.
died there? No explanation. He's dead.
He's there.
He wants wine, and Schmendrick empties a bottle of water and makes him think that there's wine in it because he wants the wine to be there. Again, with the whole, what you want to see is what you're going to see. And we see the skull just like he's called Skull. And he's drinking the wine going, that's the stuff, man. Yeah. While they're walking through the clock in a scene that I don't want to be this guy, but it is on point with what we've been doing. Like they go through the clock all, first Amalthea and then Molly. And then when Schmendrick's trying to go through, that's when Haggard shows up all angry and swinging his sword around. And then Lyra's just there on the other side.
Yeah.
Lear, how'd you get there, Lear?
I followed you.
Yes, and easy. Yeah.
And that's all the explanation. Like, how did you get in and not get seen by Schmendrick or Haggard while he's swinging the thing and forget it. He's just there now.
Keep in mind, the whole reason Haggard even shows up is because the skeleton skull recognizes Althea for a unicorn, even in her diminished state, and screeches the alarm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then Haggard shows up and blocks Schmendrick from getting in, but Schmendrick then gets in the clock, and then Haggard busts the fuck out that clock. I'm like, I mean, that's one way to deal with it, but like,
that was a great busting of the clock. I want to say that he did that already, and that's why the clock was in that condition, and he just left it that way. But that was a Citizen Kane level clock busting. That was awesome. That was good stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then we do the whole. We meet the Red Bull again, and then there's this back and forth between Amalthea and Lear about we love each other. I want to be human. You can't do that because you're a unicorn. You have to be what you are. So it's the guy who has the most interest in wanting her to be human who says, no, you have to be a unicorn because that's what you are. So, there's appearance and there's desire, but identity is separate from that. I see a girl, but you're not actually a girl. You're a unicorn. You are that. That's what you are. And
I think in that Lear demonstrates that he truly does love Althea because she wants her to be her, what she truly is, rather than what would be convenient for him. Because
exactly.
her being a unicorn is not convenient for him, you know.
No. No, it does make for a more interesting story, though.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You've got that going.
And it also ties in with his character arc, which is like he's a hero.
Yeah.
And it's what do heroes do? It's
I'm a hero. This is what heroes do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually literally says that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I'm a hero. I'm going to do the heroic thing. Like, it's on the nose, but again, Jeff Bridges makes you believe it. He's just like,
And
this
it's
is what we're
written to
doing.
work. It's written to work. It's very aware of the fantasy tropes it's playing with. It leans into them, but it doesn't make them campy or ridicule them or any of that or lampoon it. It's played very straight.
No, there's no irony. There can be humor, but no irony, and that's like a drink of fresh water, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's like, haha, look what we're doing here. It's like, no, this is it. I am self-aware. I recognize that I am the hero, and I recognize what the hero must do.
Yeah, it's self-aware in a positive way.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, that's a case of, you know, he wants to be a hero. He's aspiring to be a hero. He's like, I'm going to do the heroic thing, and then I will be a hero. And I'm going to do that so I can be a hero. And it's not like, well, why do you want to be a hero so much? Well, when I was a little boy. No, it's like, I want to be a hero because so I can be a hero. I don't have to. There's no explanation required for this. No. Who doesn't want to be a hero? Come on.
Exactly.
Come on.
Because you get a sense of this world that he lives in is a world where magic used to be much more commonplace, and now it's much less so. Mm-hmm. And, you know, heroes belong to that fantasy kind of world, and he does not live in a world that has much of that left.
No.
So when he does encounter that, he's like, well, then I may be reading into this, but it's like, okay, well, unicorns are real. Those weren't just dreams. The Red Bull is real. That wasn't just a dream. You know, magic that's not just charlatanry is real. So being a hero can be real. And that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then he even goes so far as to do the heroic death.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is not it's not a heroic death that necessarily solves the problem. Because how does the problem get solved?
Well, Althea gets turned back into a unicorn by before he gets the heroic death. Schmendrick turns it back into a unicorn because the Red Bull isn't having none of this. That's a girl. The Red Bull, like, no, that's just a unicorn shaped like a girl now, and I'm not falling for that a second fucking time.
Uh-huh.
And so they turn her back, and like the Red Bull's trying to drive her into the waves. And Lear's like, no, we're not having that. But like the Red Bull just pretty much tosses him aside. It's real quick. Like he goes down like Nathan. And I don't know that so much motivates Althea, but I think to an extent maybe it does. And she decides to go on the offensive with the Red Bull. And that's the key. At no time has anything tried to actually fight the Red Bull. They're just like, fuck, let me run from it. But she decides to fight it. And the Red Bull is not prepared for this shit because the Red Bull is essentially a bully.
Yes.
It does nothing. It's so horrifying. Who tries to fight it? Well, she fights it. And she didn't even necessarily land anything on it. She just stands up to it and drives it back into the waves. And then the other unicorns, they burst forth.
Because it's a fire bull. So you not drive it into the ocean and it's
gone.
Extinguishes.
It's gone. It no longer exists. And then this wonderful cresty wave of unicorns comes back in, and that, breaks whatever spell that King Haggard has on his tower castle, and it tumbles into the sea, and he goes down with it, and there we are.
And then out the air, heals Lear, brings him back to life. He's like, I was dead.
Yep.
No. Not anymore. Now you get to live on as the hero that you were and you wanted to be. So everybody gets what they want, you know. Schmendrick gets to become an actual magician who's real. Lear gets to be a hero. Amalthea gets to find the rest of the unicorns. The rest of the unicorns get to get free. Molly gets to go on a quest with a unicorn and help a unicorn in her plight. And Haggard gets
His comeuppance.
I mean,
Haggard gets its comeuppance.
he finally finds peace,
Yeah.
arguably.
Yeah. Because he seems to be driven by the fact that he saw a unicorn and he saw unicorns, and it's like that vision psychically dislocated him,
Mm.
and he's unable to find happiness in anything else. So he kind of has to like hoard it, but he doesn't really get to see them. He just knows that they're there. So in actually beholding them, he's, like you said, Mike, he's able to find peace. He's kind of like Denethor in,
Yes.
in Lord of the Rings, who was kind of dislocated by evil vision.
Only a much cleaner eater than Denethor.
What do you mean?
If you remember from when, was it Mary is sitting there singing to Denethor in the Great Hall of Gondor in the film, and Denethor is eating his food, and I'm just, oh, God, can I not watch this dude eat?
Yeah, of course, that's movie Denethor, and book Denethor is a little more complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that whole scene, that whole fight is not done that way. It's not stupidly suicidal charge in the book. It's actually a masterful win on Denethor's part. Like, he does exactly what he was supposed to do. And it's kind of a demonstration of how good a leader he actually is. But he's kind of destroyed by despair. Denethor is. And
I've noticed we've seen a lot of parallels between this and Tolkien.
Yeah, there's one or five, I suppose.
I mean, I don't think I've ever read anything else by Peter Beagle, but I want to say I have, but I haven't. And he's a good writer.
Yeah, I haven't read anything by him, but I think I'm going to start.
This is good fiction.
Uh-huh.
This is not simplistic. I mean, in some ways it is, but it isn't.
It's simple in the right way.
It examines fantasy tropes, but it's not trying to deconstruct it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it almost tries to say, there's a need. People need fantasy. People need this greater than themselves kind of thing.
Oh, no, for sure.
Like I said, outside of the songs, like, I can't really find anything wrong with this movie. I've always loved it, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, the story is dense. It's there. There's layers. Each watching of it, you see something new. The visuals are gorgeous.
Yeah,
and
the whole thing still holds up. Years later, it's like 40 years later. But it's still a great film. I do think that it holds up to the test of time. Like, yeah, it's a children's movie. The songs and whatnot can be trying, especially in the second half of the film.
Oh yeah.
But I do think that it's I do agree that it's kind of refreshing to watch something that very clearly is using fantasy tropes in a very straightforward, unironic way that's not really trying to deconstruct them, but is actually trying to use them in the ways that, like, fairy tales used some of these tropes to basically impart, to teach people, to essentially teach, to tell people, sort of either impart moral or, like, ethical lessons, essentially. There's the whole, like, don't believe everything that you see. Also, be careful what you want to see. that there's that it's sort of two sides of the same coin, and they're both important lessons. And I think that there's a lot of like, just in general, be careful what you wish for.
Mm-hmm.
And it differs from a lot of fairy tale tellings. Let's say, for instance, Disney type stuff. Disney villains are Disney villains. They're not multi-layered. There's nothing really to them. They're just evil and cackling and outlandish and whatever and power hungry. And the antagonists in The Last Unicorn are complicated, even to a certain extent, sympathetic. Like, Haggard. He lives in a shithole, man. I mean, it's a castle, but it's a shithole.
None of those spires are straight. Janky castle. Yeah.
Yeah, he's visibly worn by something that he's carrying, some burden that's within him. And the same is true of Mama Fortuna.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
She's visibly carrying something, and it's on the one hand, it's appropriate. It's a punishment for their sins, their crimes. But it's to see someone punished, it does make them to a certain degree sympathetic, even when they deserve it.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the way punishment works.
Yeah.
And even the ending does not work in standard fairy tale way. Like, Smedrick's like, I have done you a great injury to the unicorn. And she's like, no, well, I will never be the same again because I have known love and I have known regret. I thank you for it too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the unicorn kind of there's a kind of understanding she develops, like having been human for a brief period. She understands something which at the beginning of the movie she doesn't understand people at all, and she's not really afraid of them. She's just like, what
are these silly creatures?
What are these silly creatures, and why do they think I'm a mare? Why would you think such a thing?
Isn't it obvious? Don't you have eyes? Yeah.
I have a horn
on my head right here. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the visual design of this unicorn. She very clearly is not just simply, horse, stick a horn on it. No, this is like, she's got the features of a goat to a certain extent. She's got the cloven hooves, not the whole hoof.
That's right. That's true.
Her tail has a tuft at the end of it instead of being just like a horse's tail.
And she's got tufts on her feet too.
Yes.
And her build is much more delicate and ethereal because they have horses in this movie that they show.
Yes.
And they do not look, they are very clearly very different creatures.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into nicely what's going on here.
Yeah, you definitely get something of the visual design gives the character a certain allows the audience to understand the character. It communicates without speaking, and this creature is strange and seemingly ethereal, as you said, and delicate, but also powerful.
Yep.
So there's a lot that we see there because like I was saying before about the anime stick legs, which all the characters seem to have, but I think that's just a rankin-bass trope for these kind of films, which makes it a really interesting counterpoint to Thundercats, where everything's muscled beyond all recognition. But that's probably the influence of He-Man, and but the trunk and the thews of the unicorn are wide and solidly built, so she's not really delicate, and and that's kind of true of all the characters. None of them as weak as they initially might appear to be.
For sure. And I think this movie does a lot with visual language, with telling us, but a lot of showing instead of telling. There's some telling, but there's a lot more showing. Like when Althea is turned into a mortal, when the unicorn becomes Althea, she has a star-shaped button on her forehead. Nobody comments about it, but they show you it.
Mm-hmm. It's another thing that's just kind of like, there it is. Think what you want about it.
What you will. Make of it what you will. And, what I made of it is, it's a sign that she's a unicorn. That's where her horn is. She has to have something upon her forehead that you can only change a thing's nature so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
A lot of the visual, like the colors of when you go, the colors of original forest, which it's always eternally spring. It is never fall. It is never snow. You get to Haggard's realm. Yeah, it kind of looked like him, Haggard.
Yeah.
Not dark and ominous in an evil kind of way, but just dark and ominous in kind of a pathetic kind of way.
It's worn down.
It is. There's a worn downedness that we see throughout.
It's like, you're not looking like, oh, that is a dark, evil castle. Where will I root my faith in? And now you're like, man, I don't want to go there. Someone might rob me.
Yeah. That castle's on the wrong side of the tracks. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Ride your horse very fast past it and do not look at the turrets. Yeah, no.
Don't slow down by this castle or you'll die.
I mean, I'm not saying it's the crack house of castles. I'm just saying it's the crack house of castles.
It's you could that analogy works. It has a crack house vibe to it.
How do I roll the windows up on this horse? I don't feel safe. Yeah, no.
I should have took the carriage.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So yeah, what were you going to say, Mike? You were going to say something.
Well, so I had an interesting. This was something that I caught watching this for this time, and I didn't realize that they do actually do a pretty good job of establishing the stakes for Amalthea at the very beginning, which is to say, like, yeah, she's immortal and cannot be killed so long as she doesn't leave her forest.
Yes.
When she leaves her forest, she's vulnerable. So, like, it's this whole... But she's leaving specifically because she's like, if I'm the last one, then there is something extremely wrong with the world, because what I'm doing here is what a bunch of my, like, compatriots should be doing everywhere else. So I have to go. I have to go find out if this is the case, because what I'm doing is necessary. Like, I am effectively part of this land, doing, keeping it the way that it is. So I do think that's an interesting sort of, like, these are the stakes. Like, here's a creature that could literally just live like this forever.
Right.
Doesn't actually need to go anywhere. Like, it's already a perfect ecosystem, essentially. It's almost like utopian. The fact that she's wandering free from that is actually... That's the stakes. Like, she's vulnerable. She could be killed. She might not find anything. She could get lost. Like, all of these things.
It's a she's like a live action Holy Grail almost.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, actually, that's not too far off.
Yeah. As I was looking at her when she leaves, like, I don't think you should leave. And she's like, no, my friends, I must go. And the animal's like, I don't think this is a good idea.
This is a terrible idea.
Yeah, they'll show up and they're like, I mean, we can't stop you, but are you sure about this? Yeah.
The raccoon looks downright worried. Not that they focus on him for long, but that was a very worried-looking raccoon.
Yeah,
it was.
I mean,
And again, that's established mostly visually, with, like, just a few lines of dialogue.
Yep.
Without too much work. So again, there's a very efficient storytelling, and a lot of reliance on visual storytelling without being a it does exactly what it needs to do and nothing more, and leaves the rest for you.
Yes.
And, which is not surprising, given that Mike had informed me that the Japanese studio that animated this went on to become Studio Ghibli. Now, Miyazaki had no role in this as far as I could tell.
They were, I didn't know that until I was researching it for this episode, but it was, I can't remember their name at the moment, but they're literally the studio that became Ghibli. And that had done some of the Ghibli films prior to being Studio Ghibli.
Yes, it was called Topcraft.
Yes, that's it. Topcraft. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it was headed by Toru Hara, who was the former head of Toei Animation. which is responsible for Sailor Moon, and which I always call toilet animation to amuse my children because
Come on, Dragon Ball Z.
because I'm that guy. And yeah, they've done a lot of things. They did the Hobbit, they did the Rankin-Bass Hobbit,
Yep.
and they did the Rankin-Bass Return of the King.
Yep.
And there's like the Stingiest Man in Town, Frosty's Winter Wonderland, one or two others. And a lot of these core members went on to form Studio Ghibli. So when I say anime stick legs, I'm not wrong.
You are not.
This is and I should have noticed it, because as soon as the last music was swelling up, we were watching, like, the credits were rolling, and we start seeing all these Japanese names, and my girls are like, "Wait, why are there all these Japanese names on this piece of animation, Father?" It's like, because it's from the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And if you saw something from the 80s that was animated, you saw Japanese names, and you just learned to get comfortable with it. What was it like? I watched an episode of Inspector Gadget once, and I actually watched through the credits again. It's like all the names are Japanese. I was like, do we not have animators in America anymore? Why is that the case? And it's just one of those things. All the good animators were Japanese in the 80s, and that's they did wonderful artwork for us.
And the visual, and when you think about it, they must have really grasped the source material really well, because my wife's learning Japanese, and there are a lot of words and concepts in Japanese that just do not translate well. Like, you want to talk about potential communication gulf there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
yeah,
the fact that they were able to grasp what the story was about and make it visually translate so well, because this isn't just like, again, I've never read the source material, but you can look at this and tell that this thing is very faithful to the authorial intent. It isn't a mismatch. It doesn't conflict. The only part of this thing which does not basically like combine to make it a greater whole is the stupid ass songs, which I will harp on to my
yeah.
dying.
Well,
It's and
everything else.
I mean, part of what I had to say about this when we watched it, and I think I said this earlier, but some of the whole thing with the musical numbers is it's almost like cost of doing business. When you look at when this came out, and look, it's a children's movie. This is how you did children's movies already for like decades before they put this particular one together. So, I mean, there you go.
Yeah, they had to do it. There's like, this is
it's in the contract. Yeah,
we need songs. That's just how it is. And
but like otherwise, like, this meshes really, really well. It works really, really well. And I remember seeing it as a kid and loving it.
I think the reason that these Japanese animators are able to get behind what this is without being, intimately familiar with that culture is just because there's a certain universality to myth and folklore. They all have kind of a similar feel to them. And so even if this is something that came from a different culture, like, you can grasp the feelings of the fairy tale. And I think you can do that. That'll work the other way as well. I just don't know if they've, if we've done it as well. But we have turned a lot of cowboy movies, samurai movies, into cowboy movies, so.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Well, and to piggyback on some of what you're saying, Andrew, is this was something I've been thinking about since we watched the film the other day. And it's in the mythology and in the film, the unicorn sort of has sort of control over life more than anything. So it's like the forest where the unicorn dwells is always verdant. It's always sort of in its prime. Essentially, she can return life to someone that has died. And I was like, not to get too Jungian or whatever, but like it's almost like the unicorn itself is a sort of a stand-in for like the anima, the animating spirit of like life, essentially, but personified or like given physical form. And I think that actually tracks with not just the story that we watched, but like pretty much every other like representation of like a unicorn where they do anything other than like, sort of show up in the background. So that was an interesting thing to sort of turn over, and I wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that goes to what I said about the Holy Grail, live
Exactly.
action Holy Grail, the great animating spirit. There's a mystical quality to the unicorn. The unicorn is immortal.
Absolutely.
The unicorn is divine. The unicorn is divine as the harpy is hellish,
Yes.
and they're kind of a duality of each other. Like one's an air thing that flies and is hideous and terrifying and eats, and the other is from the earth and beautiful and gives life and does not take.
And the unicorn even points this out. That we are two sides of the same thing.
Yeah, it's a yin and a yang kind of a thing. So that's why she doesn't want to see the harpy caged, because the unicorn is purely benevolent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was shocked by how much I enjoyed this and how much I appreciated the watching of it, even if there were parts with all those songs that had me a little groany, and my kids too. But they both loved it, and
Excellent.
yeah, and she said exactly, like, I hope Disney never touches this.
Yeah, we can only hope. God.
It's really good, and there's some things that we watch in here. We'll discuss the themes, and there's like one or two, maybe three underlying themes. This is so many interwoven themes in it that, dude, we could do a series of podcasts of what's going on in this one piece of media.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we've looked at it from a very Arthurian cast so far, but which fits it based on the culture that it came from. But you could look at it in a bunch of different ways.
Yep.
And I'm this is one of those things where I was happy to finally sit down and watch it, and like, oh, now I understand why people talk about this thing. Now I get it, because at the time I was like, I don't want to watch The Last Unicorn. It's all right. Let's do this thing. And I told them, it's like, we're gonna watch this movie. Like, why are we watching this movie? So I can talk about it on my podcast. And like, okay, we're doing that, and I'm really glad that I did. And
Excellent.
we did have things that we could talk about on our podcast.
So in some ways, it's sort of the counterpoint to the Eye of Argon, which none of us enjoyed.
But Eye of Argon is in the process of being remade. The epilogue to that is that not only has someone done a total retelling of Eye of Argon, but as I said on the Discord, there's now there's a Grigner there's a Grigner mythos. Other authors have picked this up and have started telling tales in the Argon universe, and I'm gonna get a copy of it. Of both Grignire the Accordion, which is the retelling, and the Grigner Mythos book, which is I shared it with you guys on the Discord.
Yeah.
And it's got the complete Eye of Argon and then a bunch of tales, other Grigner's other tales, Grigner and his friends, and they apparently have done this. Some of them are done like taking the piss, and others have done it sincerely. So it's
runs the gamut.
Interestingly enough, Beagle did write a follow-up short story to The Last Unicorn, which is Lear's last days. He's an old man, and he's got Molly and Schmendrick with him. And at the very end of the tale, Althea makes a reappearance. The unicorn makes a reappearance.
Oh, well, that's sweet.
To see him on his way to the next life, and it's just like a little short story he did of a follow-up.
Called
just
Two Hearts.
Called Two Hearts. Just one nice little. I haven't read it, but he summarized it essentially in the extras on the DVD. He just kind of summarized what was. And honestly, this does make me want to go and check out more of his stuff.
Yeah,
I'm very interested in this writer and what it is he has produced.
He's only got a handful of novels, but he's been writing. he's apparently written a lot of he's written some screenplays.
Yep.
And has written a good bit of audio or some nonfiction. He's edited of some things. But he's been writing since the first novel came out in 1960.
Wow.
And Last Unicorn was 68.
Yep.
And then he's he's done some chapbooks and a lot of collections, short works, and
I find 68 to be an interesting time when this came out. The period of time he would have been the late 60s. And you can almost see how maybe a lot of that environment may have paralleled itself in the story of his book, in the sense of, people think of the 50s and all that as kind of like a great, like magical utopian time in the U.S. or whatever. I mean, if you were white anyway. And the 60s is where a lot of things got shook up. Like, especially the late 60s, a lot of shaking up the worldview of what was going on, of the status quo. And now that I know what time it was written in, I can see how that would have influenced how the story was written. Like,
yeah.
But even so, it's not like any kind of obvious allegory for any
No, I don't see any
period.
of that. No,
it's not an allegory for a particular time period. I can just see I can just see elements of that, in it, but very subtly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You could have told me in the 70s or the 80s, and I would have been like, "Oh, okay, well, I can see da 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 da."
Well, and the late 60s there was a huge like sort of resurgence of fantasy,
yes,
in literature. It had never really gone away from like the time of like the pulp serials, but I mean that was when like Fritz Leiber was writing, Michael Moorcock was writing. There were a lot of like some of like the fantasy greats that we grew up reading. This was when they were really, starting to take off.
The Silmarillion was published in 1973.
Oh shit! I didn't realize it was that late.
Yeah.
Posthumously, they had his son Christopher had to collect a lot of his dad's notes and edit them. Mm-hmm. I don't think Tolkien ever really intended it to see print. It was sort of his background Bible of the things that came before.
Yeah, and so really the Silmarillion is Christopher Tolkien's achievement, and we thank him for it.
Yes, absolutely.
Not a very easy read.
No, Peter Beagle is still alive.
Yes.
He is 83 years old. God bless him.
Yep.
God bless him.
I believe he's still working too.
Oh yeah, he's got a collection came out as recently as 2017.
Excellent.
Screenplays into the 90s. Like he doesn't have a lot of novels. I'm looking at like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Last one of which came out in 1999. Two Hearts came out in 2011.
Yeah.
And it's it's a limited edition chapbook containing the novelette sequel of Last Unicorn.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's a novelette.
Okay.
Which means it's just really a glorified short story. It's a short story with chapters. That's essentially a novelette.
It's under 50,000 words. Yeah.
Under 50,000 words is there's an official like word count, but it's all very up in the air.
It doesn't really.
I think you have to hit 75,000 words for it to be a novel. That's a guess. I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know.
I don't.
I've written several novellas, that I published, but yeah. So that's where we are with that. And so this is a very pleasant set of homework to do. It is much more pleasant than Eye of Argon. I am glad that I read it, or not read it, watched it, and it does make me want to check out some of the man's other work, because I don't have a whole lot of other fantasy authors under my belt. I've read a whole lot of Tolkien.
That's interesting.
I just got into this guy.
Ah, yes, Glenn Cook. Yes.
Oh, the Black Company?
Yes.
Black Company, yeah.
I'm familiar with the Black Company. So interestingly, Beagle did the screenplay for the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, and he did the screenplay for this, for Last Unicorn, and he did not do the screenplays for the other animated Tolkien works, Return of the King or The Hobbit. He did not do that.
He was not involved with those. But from looking at his, I'm going to have to definitely take a look into the other stuff. It does seem to be a lot of fantasy collections, and he seemed to have done an urban. Well, he edited an urban fantasy anthology.
Mm-hmm. He's done a lot of work as an editor, apparently.
Yeah, you will enjoy the Black Company series. I got into that. I haven't read any of the books for a while, but it's very, very interesting fantasy. Told a little more realistically than fantasy tends to get told.
He's got a very tiered prose style that
yes,
really has a nice staccato rhythm to it that makes it very easy to read. I haven't finished the first novel yet, but I'm working on it.
You will enjoy the series. He also did a fantasy detective series. You should look into. That was quite good.
Oh yeah,
it's like noir. It's noir set in a fantasy theory background.
Which one was that?
Oh.
You can make me look this up. Hold on.
I'm already looking it up. I'm going to find out what's going on with this. He's also still alive, Glenn Cook. Good for him, man. Let's see. List of works by Glenn Cook. Spin-off novels, books, Black Company, science fiction book club. Garrett P.I.
Yes.
Garrett P.I. Yeah.
Never heard of it. Fascinating.
Never heard of it either. Seems like a bit Jim Butchery, but he's writing at the same time as Jim Butcher. One of those just came out in 2013.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, Glenn Cook is still writing as well.
Yeah, the Garrett P.I. is very, very different from Dresden. I'll tell you that straight up. Because first off, while he is a detective in a fantasy setting, and he himself is not a mage. He's just a gumshoe.
Nice.
He's just man on the street, but he's not like, it's not even like he's displaced into a fantasy. This is where he grew up. He lives in a standard medieval fantasy world with magical this and magical that, and he's a detective. Yeah, that's
kind of what I was working off of with Don't Touch the Dead, which is finished now. It needs an edit before it can go into the next issue of UJ, but I did finish it.
Good.
It's better than Don't Touch the Dead. That's a necromancer.
How have you waited this long to make that joke, Kieran? How?
You said you would save the good stuff for the podcast, man.
That's what it is. It's the good stuff. And on that note. So next month we want to do a short podcast that's just quick about the next issue of UJ, and we're just gonna jibber jabber about that for like 30-40 minutes or something, or whatever, however long it takes us, and we may or may not do another full episode or another full podcast next month.
Okay,
depends on how we're feeling, right?
Yeah,
January.
Yes.
January.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right, I think we're ready to put a pin in this, right, boys?
Yes, please.
I believe so. Yes.
Please. All right, let's do it. This has been Shallow and Pedantic. The title of the episode is "Been Through the Forest on a Horse with One Horn," and I am Andrew.
I'm Mike,
and I'm Kieran.
Thank y'all very much for stopping by.